On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we're bringing up two more players from the state of Florida in the 2025 class that you need to know about, including a top 100 overall player that is wanting to make a visit to campus. With that said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. Today's episode brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. New customers join today and you'll get $150 in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And as always, I want to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week. Your team every day. Recruiting continuing to heat up, and it will keep doing so as spring practice gets closer for the Louisville Cardinals as we get closer to the spring game. If there's one trend that is for certain, that is that Jeff Brom and company will continue to prioritize the state of Florida. We're going to talk about two Sunshine State prospects on today's episode of the show, including Ben Hanks Jr. and Cameron White. We'll also answer the question whether or not it is time to worry about the Cardinals baseball team. So be sure to tune into that at the end of the show. But starting out with the pretty significant news that was released on Monday, Brian Doan of 24/7 Sports released an article titled Top-100 Cornerback Ben Hanks Jr. Goes in Depth on Planning a Handful of Spring Visits. Now, included in that list would be Miami, Georgia, Florida State, Syracuse, Penn State, Florida, and, yes, the Louisville Cardinals. Ben Hanks currently ranked as the 71st best player according to the 247sports.com rankings database, 8th best cornerback in the country, and 13th best player in the state of Florida. Full transparency, the article is protected behind a paywall, but not to ruin what Doan says, but Hanks mentions that he wants to go somewhere where he can play early. He knows Ja'Cory Brooks, Corey Thornton, two transfers that joined the program this past offseason, and that can play a factor in his decision. It brings me back to a conversation that we had with Brian Smith, the Locked On Podcast national recruiting analyst, on this show. I think it was a couple weeks ago, and then we also kind of reiterated it on the last week's episode with Brian, and he stated, paraphrasing, that players from Florida talk to other players, whether it's current players, former players, regardless. South Florida and the state of Florida in general is like its own little realm in terms of just overall culture and relationships. And Smith said that South Florida is its own continent. He went as far as saying that the South Florida area is literally its own continent because it's so different from the rest of the country when it comes to recruiting. And I found it interesting that Hanks mentioned Ja'Cory Brooks and Corey Thornton, two guys that are from the state of Florida, but went elsewhere to play. Actually, Corey Thornton went to Central Florida, but Ja'Cory Brooks obviously went to Alabama, and now they're both at Louisville. I found it very interesting that transfers were also brought up because it was an aspect of thinking that I hadn't done. I hadn't really considered that Brom and company are not only prioritizing players from Florida in the high school ranks, but also guys that, although they might not have played their college ball in Florida, are from the South Florida area, the Sunshine State as a whole. Now, we have at least introduced that notion, but we really haven't dove further in depth into the overall trend. And I thought that Bobby Petrino in 2.0 Scott Satterfield in his tenure at Louisville, I mean, there was attention that was put forth towards the state of Florida. I wouldn't necessarily say that it was like the go-to spot because Satterfield really prioritized a bunch of different areas. Now, the Southeast was fair game. The Carolinas, Georgia was a hot spot. There were some players from Florida, a couple players from Alabama, a couple players from Mississippi, obviously the Cali to the Ville movement. Petrino felt like it was a little bit more of a national scale. You had some players from out west, you had some players from up north, but mainly the southeast corridors where the coaching staff focused. But Brom really is making it a point of emphasis to leave no stone unturned in the state of Florida and do their best to try to bring in as many players from that area as possible. And it's a great area to try to go into and get players from because it's extremely talented. One of the best talent areas in the country, probably top 3, top 5 for certain. So, but the notion that bringing in transfers from that are originally from Florida could also help out with high school recruiting was an aspect of things that I didn't necessarily consider. So not only is there being a priority made to recruit high school guys from Florida, but also from the portal as well. And I think that that's key. Hanks, 6'1", 160 pounds, plays at Booker T. Washington High School. Very, very prolific program, one of the best programs in the country. Has a ton of offers, as you know. I mean, Alabama, Florida, Florida State, Georgia, Kentucky, Louisville, Miami, Michigan, Texas A&M, USC, Wisconsin, the list goes on. But the ones that Brian Doan mentions are Miami, Georgia, Florida State, Syracuse, Louisville, Penn State, and Florida. I think it is worth discussing that Hanks has some ties to the Gators program up in Gainesville. I believe he has family that has played for the Florida program, and he's been a guy that has a solid relationship with that staff and has visited there multiple times. So know that just because a player makes it to campus or wants to make it to campus this spring at Louisville, it's not the end-all be-all. And you have to look at things two ways. Number one, I'm not saying that you should discredit it by any means, because if a top 100 player or 4-star player wants to come to your campus on a visit, it's significant no matter how you slice it. Now, the level of significance and the lasting impact, well, that is to be determined, because then you have to, worry on a corresponding official visit schedule. But these top players in general, make a plethora of stops throughout spring ball, unofficial visits to where they go visit campus, watch a practice, get to meet with the staff. It's a relationship building opportunity for both parties. And ultimately, you can't look too much into it. I said, you can't, make it more significant than it already is, but you also can't undersell it either. Having a top 100 player from the state of Florida, from the city of Miami, at least want to come check out the program, it's key. Now, you have to schedule and complete that visit, and that is the next battle, but getting him on campus is the first step. At that point, you're hoping to wow him. You're hoping to make his experience a good one and persuade him enough to schedule an official visit for the coming months, the summer, etc. Hanks is a potential CB1, a guy that wants to play early at the college level. I think that of the teams on the list that Doan mentioned, Louisville is right there that can offer that, along with probably Syracuse and maybe potentially Florida. But Louisville will not have Quincy Riley after this season. They won't have Corey Thornton. They won't have Trey Franklin. They won't have Taz Nicholson as well. So there's going to be opportunities for potential early playing time for Hanks, who is a ball hawk. You watch this film, has solid size at 6'1", but very good ability to read the quarterback, does a good job of jumping passing routes, solid hands, ability to high point the football, serviceable in one-on-one jump ball situations, solid footwork, and has a ton of speed to his game. Brian Smith mentioned, very good defensive backs are all over the place in the state of Florida. So the fact that Hanks is ranked as a top 10 cornerback in the country and 13th best player in the state of Florida, it's pretty significant. And having a situation where not only are you sort of filling into your MO, which Louisville's MO is go out after the low 4-star guys, high 3-star guys that have been overlooked by the in-state and powerhouse Southern programs, and go get those guys. But when you're getting guys like TJ Capers, Stanquan Clark to join your team, you have other players that are making visits to campus. That's huge, and it definitely is going to be something to look forward to as we go through these next couple of months, is seeing just how serious is Louisville going to get in the state of Florida. Because going to visit players, having players visit campus is one thing, but getting commitments is a whole different ballgame. So obviously we are going to follow that trend and see if it comes to fruition and creates a pipeline for the 2025 class. So, but he's not the only player that we're going to talk about from the state of Florida on today's episode of the show. Cameron White, a different type of recruit. He is currently not ranked, but his offer sheet suggests that he will be ranked, and ranked rather quickly. He had some very encouraging things to say about his plans and how it relates to the Louisville Cardinals. We'll discuss what White said here coming up momentarily after we talk about our friends and the title sponsor of the show, FanDuel. Get buckets with FanDuel. With your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 money line bet, or actually any winning $5 bet in general. That's $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all your favorite NBA players and teams with the quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and more. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot. FanDuel is the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Cardinal fans, Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube, and now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV channels app. We mentioned right before the break that there was another Sunshine State standout that will be, making some visits in the spring, and one that is high on the Cardinals. That is 2025 edge rusher Cameron White. White currently is not ranked according to 24/7 Sports or the 24/7 Sports Composite. However, his college list would probably go to show you that he's going to get ranked, and he's probably going to get ranked pretty quickly. Let me read to you who all has offered since the turn of 2024. Louisville actually kind of got ahead of the game and offered last May, and he's been on campus a couple of times, so that's key, and that sort of points to the narrative that Louisville likes to get in on commitments early and try to build that relationship before teams get into the recruitment. It's like the stock market. If you remember that quote from The Wolf of Wall Street, to where Jordan's on the phone with that prospective customer, and Leo DiCaprio says, you need to jump, obviously paraphrasing, you need to jump on it now, but before you hear it in the Wall Street Journal, because once you do, it's already too late. And that sort of draws parallels to recruiting, is that you need to build relationships with these players before their recruitments blow up, because if you wait till the big dogs come in, it's probably going to be tough to fight that uphill battle. But back to the point at hand, since January 26th, White has gotten offers from South Florida, Indiana, Tulane, Syracuse, Nebraska, Oklahoma, Oregon, Florida A&M, SMU, South Carolina, Utah, Missouri, and Central Florida. So his recruitment has definitely seen it rise a good amount. He mentions in an article with Steve Wiltfong, the national recruiting analyst for 24/7 Sports, he's going to be at Oklahoma and Miami. He's going to be at Oklahoma, Miami, in Colorado in March. He'll be at West Virginia in April. And he doesn't say anything about when he's coming to Louisville, but I don't want to spoil the article too much. But he does say that he's going to take an official visit to the Cardinals program at some point in the future. He also says that he's going to be at A&M and Oregon later this week. So his recruitment will start to take off. But the fact that he is going to be scheduling an official visit, I would assume for probably as early as the spring game, as late as June, I would say mid to late June, that White will make his way onto campus. And it helps that you build up that relationship. Cameron White plays for Sumner High School in Riverview, Florida. And one thing that interests me is what role he's going to play moving forward. I think he's more of an an outside linebacker, stand-up linebacker, probably playing the Leo spot, which would make a lot of sense. He's 6'1", 220 pounds. This past season had a breakout junior year for Sumner. He is playing in Riverview, Florida, which I'm not sure how far it is away from Tampa, but I know it's in the southeast corridor right under the Tampa area. So if the competition is similar to that of the main city, then you would assume that he's playing against some solid competition. So I think that this is usually the type of player that the Cardinals are in on in the state of Florida, the underrated guys that don't get a ton of attention, at least not early on. And by the time the big dogs do come into the recruitment, the relationship's already been established. Louisville has, laid the groundwork to receive a commitment, and then they do. But make no mistake about it, this isn't your average diamond in the rough type prospect, because like I'm going to say it how it is, like many other prospects that we will see in the next couple of months, their stocks will rise from unranked to ranked pretty decently at some point. I mean, you look at Grady Anthony, wasn't ranked, had offers from Louisville and Eastern Kentucky, and goes from unranked, goes to the best of the Midwest, pops up in front of a ton of recruiting analysts, and he's now ranked just outside of the top 800. Brian Smith said in the episode last week, rankings are, so different in the way that they are compiled. There's some biases around programs. College coaches talk to, rankings analysts and vice versa. And it's all about who you get to see in person. You can only see so many players at once. Cameron White being in this article from Steve Wiltfong, who has a direct impact on those rankings, I think is only foreshadowing for what we're going to see coming up here shortly, probably the next couple of months, especially if he were to appear and show out at certain camps. That would make a ton of sense. And ultimately, I think if you made me choose where I think we're probably going to see White at in the rankings debut, it's probably going to be just outside of the top 800, just like Grady Anthony. But at least it gets the ball rolling to set up the stage for his senior season to where he can, raise his level of play. And he's already on the radar, and he rises in the recruiting rankings. So ultimately, this is going to be a recruiting that we're going to focus on, because there are a ton of top schools that are trying to get involved in the mix with White. Very, very good player. And I think that at the end of the day, it's going to be a tough battle, because I could definitely see teams getting involved. But even though he is not currently ranked, I think that could also help to Louisville's benefit, because teams like Oregon, teams like Texas A&M go after the larger fish in recruiting. So Louisville prioritizing a player like White when you have players like, or teams like A&M and Oregon that might say, hey, look, just hold off a minute. I'm not saying that's to be the case, but it happens every year with a slew of different players. So it's something to focus on. But two players that are different in their recruitments, but both are pretty serious about the University of Louisville. I'm interested to see how their recruitments continue to develop moving into the spring and heading into the summer months. So football recruiting will continue to rise and rise. We're going to bring Brian Smith back onto the show hopefully this week and talk about 3 more prospects from Florida that have been linked to the Cardinals. So be sure to stay on the lookout for that. But for the conclusion of this show, we're going over to the baseball side of things for the first time this season. And unfortunately, the start of the 2024 season, not the greatest for Dan McDonnell's Cardinals team. We're going to answer whether or not it's time to worry about the baseball team. Before we do that, I want to thank you all again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of the day. Just a reminder that the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, including YouTube, 5 days a week, your team every day. There's going to be a ton of content this week as we get closer to March 1st, so just be sure to keep an eye out. We'll probably have Brian Smith back on the show. We'll have Grant Mulligan on for his weekly appearance, and we'll continue to talk football. So be sure to stay tuned, but definitely appreciate you all for being an everyday listener. But to conclude the show, we're going to have a difficult conversation about the baseball team. To answer the question, is it time to worry about baseball? And as complex as things are, yes and no. It's time to worry, but it's not time to panic. And it's important that we know the difference between the two. It's time to have some concerns, which many people do, but due to where we are in the schedule, it's not time to panic at the moment. The Cardinals in the first 7 games of the year have a losing record. They are 3-4. They started out the year 0-4. They lost to Indiana State 8-7 in the opener in Tampa, lost 4-3 against UConn. The game against South Florida got canceled. They got blown out in the midweek home opener against Xavier 9-1. And then they lost 4-3 against St. Bonaventure in 8 innings. And at that point, you're 0-4. And something has to give because Louisville fans are expecting, at worst, regional host, super regional appearance, and another bid to the College World Series. The Cardinals have missed the postseason in 2 of the last 3 seasons, and it has people sort of on edge. In 2024, you brought some players in the transfer portal. You have a great freshman class, but you start out pretty rough. You go 0-4. Now, after that, you beat St. Bonaventure 21-3 in 7 innings to get the first win of the year. Right after that, you win 15-2. And it was a back-and-forth game against the Bonnies in the series finale. It was a 4-game series. They won 18-11. So you're 3-4. And truthfully, because it's so early in the year, you shouldn't panic. Because baseball is such a weird sport where sometimes it takes some time, takes about a month for a team to get going. And I think it's just way too early. Now, if it's March 26th and you're still seeing these struggles, then yes, by all means, we're in conference play at that time. You definitely can have some concerns. So, but until then, let's hope that Louisville is able to turn the page, create a win streak, and try to get back on the right track because the talent is there. So, no, I don't think it's time to panic. However, there should be some concern and there should be some worries because anytime now Louisville historically, they don't perform well in this tournament down in Florida, and they went 0-2. But when you lose to Xavier the way that you did, when you lose to St. Bonaventure, when you give up a good amount of runs in that last game, it does make people wonder about the pitching. The pitching has been sort of hit or miss. Now, small sample sizes are something that, we have to understand, and I'm trying not to overanalyze, and that's the worst thing you do right now. Right now, you've got players that really haven't been pitching all that well. I mean, there are 4 players with sub 5 ERAs. Actually, I'm sorry, I apologize. There are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 players with above 5 ERA. 4 of them over 10. 5 of them over 10. I'm sorry. But that being said, it's still early. You need Sebastian Gongora, the transfer who's going to be your ace, to lock in and be your go-to guy, because starting pitching, it is what it is. I mean, you have some guys like Evan Webster, who I think, Evan Webster has been great in his 2 appearances. He started 2 games, 8 innings pitched, given up 1 earned run while striking out 9. He's got a 1.13 ERA. Gongora has pitched 11 innings, and he's given up 5 runs in that span. And, you also have Parker Detmers, who started a game, who I felt like, had some solid moments here and there. Patrick Forbes had some decent moments here and there. He kind of struggled a little bit. Carson Leggett also had some solid moments, but it's time for guys to step up for this team in the starting position, also in the bullpen. So pitching is where I'm looking for this team to step up. Some of the young guys I'm extremely excited for. You have at this time Zion Rose, who's batting .308. Now he's only had 13 at bats, but he looks to be an extremely, extremely solid player. You also have Lucas Moore, freshman from Cincinnati, who at this point is, I think, 4th on the team, batting .409, and he started 6 out of the 7 games. JT Benson has been fantastic. Matt Klein has been good. Luke Napleton as well. I'm looking for Isaac Humphrey to break out of his slump, along with Logan Beard, Eddie King Jr. as well. You need some of the older guys to take a step forward, but I also think it's worth mentioning that Zion Rose and Luke Moore should pretty much be everydayers in this lineup. And Zion Rose is the future of this program. So I think it's on the whole team to be able to take that next step forward. I'm worried more about the pitching than I am the hitting at this point. But if the pitching comes around to where it can at the very least be serviceable, then Louisville's going to win a good amount of games and they're going to get back to the tournament. But that is where we are at this point, is that the pitching has to be better as you get through the non-conference slate, because you don't want to get to a point to where, you've turned it up an ACC play, but you were so bad against bad teams that you hurt your RPI and you were on the outside looking in. So the Cardinals will look to turn things around in the next couple of weeks. There's a ton of opportunity. You have midweeks against Eastern Kentucky and Morehead State that you need to win. You need the pitching to step up. You have a series against Youngstown State this weekend, and then you host Northwestern the weekend after that. So, and then you have Lipscomb, and then ACC play will arise. So it's time to be concerned. It's not time to panic. It's important to know the difference between the two. Only variable right now is time. So we will talk about the season as it progresses. But that's going to wrap up this Monday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day. We'll see you right back here tomorrow.